いいかい、サトル。呪術は非術師を守るためにある。
まあ大丈夫でしょう。俺たち最強だし。ああ、そうか。そうだな。そうかもな。すぐる、こいつら殺すか？今の俺なら多分何も感じない。
いい。意味がない。
それ本当に必要か？
大事なことだ。サルメ。
From the first minute this episode starts, my body tensed up. It was a similar feeling I had when watching Across the Spider-Verse for the first time. I knew this episode was going to be special. This episode has Nakagawa directing and Gosho on the storyboard. Having Gosho on storyboard for the conclusion of the Hidden Inventory arc is perfect, with him being the one to direct and storyboard the first episode of the arc, and this decision complements Gosho's vision. The episode feels very similar to the structure of a standard Monogatari episode, as we start the arc with Geto's monologue and end the arc with an episode focused entirely on Geto. Geto is the protagonist of this episode, and throughout we witness this downward spiral that ironically seems uplifting. This episode begins 1 year after the events of the previous episode. Geto is traumatized by the experience with the Star Religious group, thus making him question his purpose. The use of the traumatic clapping sound of the Star Religious group throughout the episode is genius, blending itself with the sound of water in the shower or the rain outside, where the thought of, should I kill all non-sorcerers, is drowning Geto's mind, literally. It's a really cool addition, and this conflict of the two versions of Geto continues until one side ultimately erupts. The climax of this episode is Geto's decision being acted upon, and the aftermath of said actions leading to Gojo's confrontation with Geto brings forth my favorite scene in the episode. What I love so much about this scene is how much the tone can shift depending on perspective, with Gojo's perspective provided in volume 0 that is dark, void of color, with the surroundings moving so slowly that it gives you the impression that time has stopped, reflecting Gojo's powerlessness. Now, what Gosho does with Geto's perspective in this episode is phenomenal, and the key to what is now my favorite scene in the entire series is Yoshimasa Teirui. I know in my video discussing the anime shifting towards the Shibuya arc, I voiced a concern on the series soundtrack, and I got some comments discussing their opinions as well, which got me thinking, have I truly evaluated Jujutsu Kaisen soundtrack to where I can form a confident opinion? So I spent a night just listening to the soundtrack of season 2 while going over many platforms, seeing others' takes, and just really thinking about it a lot. And maybe in 5 years I'll say I was gaslighting myself, but on this channel I pride myself in creating content talking about how I feel right now, regardless if it might change in the future. I don't view that as switching up or being inconsistent or a fraud as people on Twitter would, where the structure of that environment thrives on the belief that the opinion you form today must never change. When I first saw this scene on a Twitter post, I immediately thought it was horrible. My expectation was a song that would embody the feeling of heartbreak that Volume 0 and personally what I believe the manga portrayed of this scene. Now this doesn't mean something that didn't meet my expectations is automatically bad. There have been many times the story has a development I didn't completely expect or go through with like the concept originally. Like I thought the concept was like really horrible on paper, but surprised me because of how great the execution was. And a similar experience occurred when I watched the episode in its entirety instead of just watching the scene in a vacuum. The song Arrogance embodies these two conflicting beliefs Geto has throughout the episode, with the track dropping and starting at many points in the first half, timed perfectly with the traffic passing by and the dialogue where there are many shifts in the argument between the two, concluding with Geto claiming, "I've decided how to live my life," and for the first time in the entire episode, Geto's face is not drained of life in a bright atmosphere while the track simultaneously switches to uplifting. I realized this scene elevated the source material to a point I couldn't envision, and I just sat there in awe. I couldn't believe a non-action focused Jujutsu Kaisen episode could move me like that. It was a different experience. I don't really know what else to say. I was just so in awe. It was just wow. I didn't know the series could peak like that for me at a certain point like that, like just the anime specifically. And for the last 4 minutes of this episode, like, it decided to go even further, twisting the tone of the traumatic collapse of the Star religious group into like a celebration for Geto's forceful takeover as leader. That was a really cool switch that they did there, somehow invoking emotions from me in a Megumi related scene. That is very rare to do. And then the final scene of the episode where Gojo wakes up and You Better Get Strong track playing in combination with seeing the trio together got me teary-eyed. And it's weird because one of my greatest criticisms of the current JJK manga is my lack of emotional investment with the cast. This always baffles me because from the beginning to the Shibuya arc, I believe the series had many moments where I felt emotionally invested, and the series capitalized on these moments a lot. But with the current arc in JJK, I find myself feeling detached a lot of the time. And I'm questioning if these characters even feel human, or were they just always supposed to be walking plot points? And it hurts a lot. So it feels amazing to know that the anime is continuing to keep that spirit and reminding me why I fell in love with the series. And maybe once the anime gets to the current arcs of JJK, they find a way to elevate the content in a way that I couldn't even expect, and it just makes me look at the current arc differently. But I'm really touched by this episode. It's again my favorite episode of JJK, and it just really does what the series does well for me, and why I love it so much. It's just a series that knows how to manipulate my emotions, a series that brought some of my joy back in just shonen manga. And yeah, that's why this is the greatest episode in Jujutsu Kaisen.